Sometimes when running lots of monsters in our game, it can be a real chore to track damage to every individual monster. This actually leads us to not tend to run more than 6 to 8 monsters in any given battle, even if it makes sense where the characters are facing many, many more. In fact, in a lot of popular fiction, we love stories where a small group of heroes are facing off against dozens or even hundreds of bad guys. It's a really cool idea. And yet, because of the mechanics of the game, we tend not to want to run scenes like that because it's just too much of a chore. There are actually a few tools we can use to run dozens to hundreds of monsters in any given combat in our game, and the damage pool is one of them. The damage pool makes it very easy for us to track the damage done to a large horde of bad guys. We use a damage pool by tracking the amount of damage that the entire horde takes, rather than tracking the damage that each individual monster takes. This is one of a series of tools for running hordes that I talk about in the Lazy DM's Companion. I also have a webpage where I talk about it, which you'll find in the show notes below. The damage pool actually runs on its own, though. We don't need to use any of the other tools for running hordes in order for us to get the advantage from running a damage pool. We can basically use a damage pool anytime it becomes too tedious or cumbersome to track damage done to a large number of monsters. So here's how a damage pool works. Instead of tracking damage to each individual monster, we track damage done to any of the monsters of one type in a big horde of monsters. Anytime any monster in that horde takes damage, we track that damage in a damage tracker. Anytime that damage tracker is high enough that a single monster would die, we remove the last monster to take that amount of damage. Now, one trick to make this easy is that we round the hit points of each individual monster to the nearest 5 or 10. So let's say, for example, we're running a bunch of skeletons. Instead of having skeletons have 13 hit points each, we're going to round them up to 15. So each skeleton in the horde has 15. If we wanted slightly easier skeletons, we could give them 10 hit points instead. But let's stick to 15 for the time being. Now let's say the damage pool takes 12 points of damage. No skeletons die. The minute it takes 3 more points of damage, that skeleton that's hit, that skeleton dies. So let's say you have a fighter that's hacking into it and does 30 points of damage, 2 skeletons would die. Let's say a fighter does 37 damage hewing into this big pile of skeletons. That's enough to kill 2 of the skeletons, so we remove those skeletons. We reset the damage pool to 0 and then carry over the remaining 7. So then if another character does 8 more damage, that would kill a 3rd skeleton. So that way, every time the damage pool is taking enough to kill a monster, we remove a monster and reset the pool. If it takes enough damage to kill multiple monsters, we remove multiple monsters, reset the pool, carry over any remaining damage, and continue onward. This way, the pool is always staying relatively small. The only amount of damage that's left in the pool is less than the damage that any one monster would have. So we don't have to calculate out tons and tons of hit points. We're just watching this damage threshold go back and forth as that pool takes enough damage. Now, how do we track the number of monsters? If we're running a Theater of the Mind style battle where you're just describing them getting attacked by 50 skeletons, in our notes, we want to keep track of how many skeletons are there. And every time those skeletons are getting killed, we decrement that number of total skeletons while the damage threshold is continually being reset and any damage is being carried over. But if we're using tokens or miniatures, we can just use the tokens and miniatures as a way to show how many monsters are left. Every time a monster is killed, we remove a token, we remove a miniature until all the tokens and miniatures are gone, and then we know they're all destroyed. Now, what about areas of effect? Typically, in a battle like this, the characters are significantly more powerful than the horde of monsters that they're facing. So if they're throwing a big area of effect out there that's pretty powerful, instead of worrying about doing any of the math, just remove all of the monsters that were hit by the area of effect. So if you have 50 skeletons attacking the characters and a wizard throws a fireball into the middle of them, just determine about how many skeletons that fireball would hit, say 14, and remove all 14 skeletons. They all die. All their bones are flying through the air on fire. But sometimes they might get hit with an area of effect that's particularly small. If you determine in the story that is probably not enough to destroy them, instead of having everybody destroyed, you could instead just figure out the same way, which is how many targets were hit, how much damage was done to each target, add all of that together, add it to the damage pool, see how many of that kills, remove those monsters, and carry over any difference to the reset pool. Now, when you're using a system like the damage pool, you want to make sure that you talk about it with your players. Explain how it works to them. Explain the concept that any damage done to any of the skeletons is going to be tracked in a pool, and the next skeleton that's hit is going to die. Once you've used it a few times with your players, they're going to understand how it works, and they actually understand that it's in their favor because damage is carrying over from one monster to the next. It means that a warrior can hew through 3 or 4 bad guys at once if they do enough damage, rather than only killing the one and then having the remainder of their damage not done anywhere. Now, a lot of people say, well, what about 4th edition style minions? In the 4th edition of D&D, there was a type of monster called a minion that had only 1 hit point. Any any successful attack against that minion would destroy it, or anytime that minion failed a saving throw, it would also be destroyed. That technique can work really well if the monsters are significantly less powerful than the characters, but if they have any meat on their bones at all, 1 hit point really isn't going to be enough. You don't want to have it where a wizard with magic missile can kill 5 of these things by just pinging each one with a magic missile. Maybe if the characters are powerful enough and the monsters are weak enough, maybe that's cool, and doing a 1 hit point minion is a fine way to go. But if you want to go with monsters that are a little bit more powerful than that, the damage pool is a good way to use the actual hit points of a monster, but be able to track the damage that's done over time. We keep tools like the damage pool in our toolbox so that we can share the kinds of stories that we love in popular fiction. The idea of having hordes of bad guys attacking our characters is a really cool idea, and we don't want to throw it out just because the system tends to better support running 6 to 8 monsters against the characters. We want to have all of the tools available that we can use to share the stories that we enjoy. The damage pool is one of these tools that we can use to track the damage done to a huge horde of monsters. It's a really powerful tool that way, and I hope you'll try it out in your next game. If you enjoyed this video and you want more tips like this, please subscribe to the Sly Flourish newsletter, where you'll get a weekly RPG-related email sent directly to your inbox and a free adventure generator PDF. You can also support me directly on Patreon, where you get access to a monthly Q&A, a dedicated Discord server, the City of Arches sourcebook, Uncovered Secrets Volume 1 and 2, and a whole bunch of other exclusive content. And you can pick up any of my books, including Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, The Lazy DM's Companion, and The Lazy DM's Workbook, all at the Sly Flourish bookstore. All the links for those in the show notes below. Thank you all very much. Have a great day, and get out there and play an RPG.